Hey, how's everyone doing? Welcome along to this episode where I'm chatting today with John Cesar from the States. So, welcome along, John. Do you want to share a bit about yourself?
Cool, yes. Thank you so much, Dave, for having me. And so, guys, my name is John. I am a primarily classical guitarist and classical guitar teacher over here in the United States on the East Coast. I have completed my undergrad and master's degree in classical guitar. And following that, I went on to do some Suzuki guitar training, which I'm sure we'll get into later on in the video. And I've been teaching guitar for over 10 years. I started teaching guitar when I was pretty young, as soon as I was old enough to need money to do things. And it's been what I've been doing ever since. So I'm very excited to talk about it.
Brilliant, man. Well, thanks for taking the time. It's been really cool chatting with the other teachers as well. And so many, you're the first classical guitarist I've chatted with. So I'm pretty sure there'll be some great insights for everybody watching. So, we were chatting about Suzuki before I hit record, and I was saying that I'd done 5 days of a training course in Suzuki, and if you were to describe Suzuki guitar to somebody watching very briefly, how would you put it, John?
So the biggest differences that I describe between Suzuki guitar and I guess what you could call maybe traditional guitar is that Suzuki has these few elements. Element number one is the parent involvement. So the parents have to be involved in every single lesson. The primary job is just taking notes and then also being involved at home and doing what's known as being the in-home teacher. So their job is to practice, make sure the stuff that's done in the lesson is being reinforced properly at home. The other element that makes it different is the element of the group class. Along with lessons, most Suzuki studios have either weekly, but more commonly bi-weekly group classes. In those group classes, what I tell parents is would do the things that it would just be almost impossible to do in a one-on-one basis, where we can play games and activities with all different students, and we can also have sometimes the parents being involved in the groups as well, which is a lot of fun. Kids really seem to enjoy it. And the biggest element, which I think will probably be a big talking point, is getting involved with learning how to play first by listening as opposed to maybe the more traditional way, which is learning how to play by reading sheet music and using a method book. So the students, along with their technique and everything else that they do, they get a daily listening each week. And what they have to do is they have to listen to the Suzuki Guitar Book 1 or whatever book they're on, CD, hopefully daily. And that's the other parent's job, is make sure the student is listening to that CD every single day. And what I tell parents is the more they listen to the songs, the easier it'll be to figure the songs out once they get there.
Nice, nice. I remember at the time that blew my mind. The involvement of the parent, and do they still give the book Nurtured? Is it Nurtured by Love to the parents?
Yeah. So Nurtured by Love is a book that all Suzuki families should read. It kind of goes over kind of the philosophy without telling you this is the philosophy. And what it does is it tells you it through stories of the founder of the Suzuki Method, Shinichi Suzuki. And he just talked about his stories when he was figuring it out, things that were successful, things that weren't successful. And what you end up seeing is you see really the effects of this method on the student, not only as a musician, but more so as a person as well, which is kind of the big overall outlook. It's not only about the music, it's about developing a good person through helping them grow their connection to music.
That's really cool. Yeah, I remember seeing that, and like you said, the parents' involvement, that triangle of the parent, the teacher, and the child, and it really, I found doing the course, like, used to shred and used to this and that, and the very first thing we did was Twinkle Twinkle on one note for a solid 5 to 10 minutes, and I remember going, I was like, what is going on here? And all of a sudden, like you're saying about the ear, definitely I found, and other people said they found that their ear, the tone of the note, and it was also like a mindfulness, I think, playing, you kind of got into it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's cool. So Suzuki, and is it a thing then? I know it's said a lot with young children. Do adults take up Suzuki guitar even if they don't become teachers?
That's something that's very interesting. The big element that makes Suzuki guitar, like I said before, is the parents and the group class, which obviously I'm not going to make someone even 15 and up bring their parents to lessons. That might not be the most fun thing, and also might not be the most needed thing. The group class, I think anybody can enjoy, obviously, but I do think the method behind it is going to be one of the more solid methods for almost anybody to learn. And the big thing is, because like many people, I've taught people using the basic Hal Leonard book, Mel Bay, whatever book you guys use, and I have some even adult students that were maybe just your more traditional classical guitar students who I then said, well, what if we started using some of these Suzuki pieces? And right away, as soon as the focus could be on what their hands were doing and how the music sounded, I noticed a big improvement of the overall connection to what they're applying. And for me, the big element of Suzuki is the figuring by ear part, I guess. And the parent part obviously is important, but the big part is the learning it by ear. And once they start doing that, I noticed a big improvement in their playing overall and just their enjoyment to what they're doing on the guitar. So I think adults could use Suzuki. Obviously, it wouldn't be totally 100% Suzuki because we wouldn't have all of those elements in there. But it definitely, in terms of the process of how it's learned, I think adults could use it definitely and be pretty happy and successful with it.
Nice, nice. What you said earlier about the structure of it as well is so good. Like that, how you'd put it, that you could go to a festival and meet a student and you'd know what piece they're on, and it's like all the teachers are trained in the method. So if they're stuck on a piece, they'll get an answer from some teacher because they'll be familiar with it.
Exactly, yeah. So as you're saying, so the listening is obviously the piece that they're going to play. So what that means is that every student is going to be playing the exact same pieces, and that might not seem like the most fun thing at first. But what's really cool about that is number one is everyone's always asking questions like, "Oh, what song is so and so on?" Because all these kids know each other from group class. So everyone's like, "Oh, what song are you on? What song are you on? Oh, so and so's on book two. I want to be on book two." Or "Oh, so and so is on the last song in book two. I can't wait till I get to the last song in book two." And there's this kind of it starts to build this community of just excitement around the music that they're going to play. And again, as you were saying, is because all teachers are trained on the same pieces, you can go to a Suzuki festival, you can go and substitute for another Suzuki teacher, and you're going to go in and just ask the student what piece you're on, and you'll know all the techniques that are needed to learn that piece, you'll know the common difficulties that students have with the piece, you'll know the best way to approach learning the piece and all the stuff that you can kind of imagine. So it makes it actually much easier for the teacher. But what I find is because it's easier for the teacher, it then makes it more successful for the student because everything is so much clearer for them.
Yeah, it seems so streamlined, and like when you think of learning off, it's like the polar opposite of learning guitar off the internet. It's
Oh
like
yeah, yeah. In a way, definitely, yeah.
so we might contrast that, and like now the Suzuki method. There's a Suzuki school here in Ireland. I'm on the west coast, and there's a Suzuki school I think an hour away, and like they meet up and like the thing massive orchestra, and it looks brilliant. And there seems, do you find students are generally calmer who studied the Suzuki method on guitar?
hmm
Yeah, like in the training, I noticed that the instructor was giving examples of children who might have come in and they'd be up here high octane, and after a while they kind of ground and just get into it, and just it was really about respect and just feeling relaxed.
Definitely, I think one of the big approaches to Suzuki, I guess one of the big concepts of it is it's not really about building great musicians. I mean, I think that's definitely ends up being one of the end results, but it's more so about helping the student grow as a person, right? But and through music, and you do really see big. I do notice a lot of my students that are super involved in it, that have parents super involved in it. A lot of them, from what I see at least, seem really like great kids. They're very respectful. They're very excited about their lesson. And overall, what you see is you see a really strong connection between the parent and the student, which is kind of what you want. Obviously, as any teacher knows, the involvement of the student. I think as any teacher knows, the involvement of the parent in the student's life is so important with music or otherwise. So having the parent there, encouraging them and getting them excited about what they're doing, just strengthens that connection, and it ends up being a really cool experience for both the student and parent together.
That's cool. Yeah, and do you find then, like we were saying about teenagers starting and how a 15-year-old mightn't bring their parent, does a young kid who begins, and let's say this bond with the parents begins to form and strengthen, does that carry into the teenage years then, because it started young through Suzuki Guitar for lessons?
The funny thing is it can. I think what happens is because we start getting kind of a whole culture behind it, right? Is some students, if they start that young, they kind of don't know anything different, as weird as it sounds. So for them, like having a parent there just might be normal. It's not it's not a weird thing because they've been doing it for so long. Now, of course, with that being said, the role of the parent starts to shift. In a more traditional kind of teaching, one thing we talked about in college is there's the idea of like the split between the student and the teacher, where maybe at first with a younger student, it might be like 90% of the teacher, the responsibility is to have the student do stuff and 10% for the student. But as the student starts to develop more, as they learn more about how to practice better, as they get older, as they learn more skills, the weight starts to shift. And eventually maybe it's just 10% teacher and 90% student, and that 10% might just be providing pieces, saying, hey, look, you should learn this, or oh, you gotta check out this recording. And the student's job is to actually be the one to do it, or maybe actively find more things. I think the same thing can apply for Suzuki. with the parent as the student gets older. And I've seen older students where they come in with their parent, they may be 15, 16 years old, and the parent just kind of comes in, sits on the side of the room, just kind of sits and watches the whole time. That doesn't do anything.
Mm.
And other times I've seen the parent not there at all. I think at that point it really depends on what the student feels comfortable with and what the student and the parent both want. And I'm sure there's times the kid says to the parent like, "Hey, mom and or dad, like I don't want you to sit on the lesson anymore. It's okay. I think I can do it myself," and that's totally fine. Other times the kid doesn't have a preference because they're like, "Yeah, you can just come in and sit on the side." And other times the parent can still take notes, but maybe not be involved because the parent isn't really doing it in the teaching. The parent just at that point is just there as an extra set of hands to take notes,
Okay.
which is also pretty convenient, obviously.
Cool, yeah, gee, no, that's great, that's great. And is it with the method? We've kind of gone deep in here in the method, but I think
Yeah.
it's fascinating because, as you said, the other books, the Hal Leonard, Mel Bay, and the million other books out there,
Yeah.
those are the common ones, and this is something that sometimes people see from the outside, and they don't talk with people who are on the inside of it. So, with parents, then, is one parent kind of designated as the parent to come, or is it a mix, or does that affect the dynamic?
It can be both, I guess. So what I tell everyone is, ideally, honestly, it should be one parent. But as you know, with parents and everyone these days, everyone's just so busy. Everyone has their own lives, and I don't want that to be the limiting factor. So what I tell parents is this: I tell them that you have two options. Either option one is you could have, well, I guess three. You have option one where you could have one parent doing everything, which is probably the best because it's just like very clear, it's very concise. But again, that's not always doable. So what I tell them is, if you want to have one parent and someone else comes occasionally, that's totally fine, right? Just make sure that person is filled in on what we're doing. You give them the notebook if you have a notebook that you're taking notes in, and all that stuff. However, if the parent knows that, hey, probably twice a month we're going to have like grandma come and do the lesson, or twice a month we're going to have the other parent come in and do the lesson. What I tell them is that's totally fine, but make sure that everyone's on the same page, right? Everyone has to, for example, if we're talking about Nurture by Love, all people involved would have to read Nurture by Love. All people involved would have to understand what we're doing in the class. Almost like if I would have to quiz the parent, anyone who's involved should know, like, this is what this technique looks like when it's done well. This is what this technique looks like when it's done maybe not so well. And I tell them it's more work, but if that's what you have to, if that's the situation that you're in, then this is the solution. And the other thing I tell them, which I'm sure other teachers have said more or less in some kind of terminology or another, but I tell them is the more complicated the situation, the more creative the solution needs to be. So in this case, that's just might be a complex situation where it's like, okay, well, every other week, mom and or dad goes on a business trip every month, or it's like, okay, well, that's certainly a complex situation. So you guys have to have a creative solution, whether that's, again, the solution I presented earlier, but this goes for anything else too, whether it's in terms of scheduling practices, whether it's in terms of making certain things work. Everyone's in different situations. As a teacher, I'm not definitely going to take someone out just because they can't do this thing just as well in the same way as so-and-so, but I do tell them, like, you're in a unique situation, so we need to find possibly a unique solution for your situation.
Okay, wow, man, geez, it's fascinating. And with, like, when it comes to technique, it's a great one for young kids starting off. Now, let's say, so as an example, I play fingerstyle, and it's on my present to myself list to get myself a nice nylon string guitar this year. And my technique, by all shapes and form, wouldn't be classical at all. As an adult who'd want to improve their fingerstyle technique, would you recommend, like, dipping into Suzuki to get more to grips with it?
So the funny thing is with Suzuki, if any of you guys have ever looked through the Suzuki Method, the book itself, Suzuki Guitar Book 1, you're going to notice that it looks either the most, like, not helpful book ever, and it looks also very complex. And the reason why is because all of the techniques and things that you learn that you need for the book, and that the students actually get to learn, is what you learn in your Book 1 training. So you learn your training, like, hey, here are all the techniques that you need to learn. This is the best way to teach these techniques. These are techniques that you need for this piece. And you open the book, and all it is just the pieces. So as an adult, or for any adult looking to get into it, I think the best way to look at it actually would probably just be to buy your standard, just like Duncan, the Charles Duncan Modern Persia Classical Guitar is a good one. The Aaron Sheeran Method is a great one. The Node Solo Guitar is a great method. But any classical guitar method book that is probably that's probably just your standard like same thing, the equivalent of the Hal Leonard of the Mel Bay books. But for classical guitar, it's probably going to be the best thing to get you going, because they're going to actually have pages on like, hey, this is how you properly do this technique. Oh, this is this note and how you would probably play it. This is how you hold the guitar. Where the Suzuki method won't really tell you that.
Okay, perfect. And that is such a thing, like having to find a method nowadays. Definitely for fingerstyle, like it's like banging out a few open chords, you'll get away with it. The big thing I see nowadays on the net, and the questions I'm getting, is a great one. Twice it's happened in the last week with students. One in person and another who was online. I did a live stream last night on YouTube, and so I just said, what's your single biggest challenge? And somebody said, finger picking. I don't feel like I'm moving forward. And next thing, I just happened to mention in the stream, I was like, well, a lot of times people enter finger picking and the first thing they'll get caught by is a YouTube video that'll pop up going, easy fingerstyle songs, and nothing else matters is up on it because it's open strings. And but then they're kind of caught, this thing of picking with whatever finger just to make the sound come out, and get so caught like.
Yeah, so one big thought I have on that, and I think this goes true for adult students as well. I don't know about you or any other teachers that are here watching, but one thing that you guys might have noticed is that it's a lot harder sometimes to teach adults than it is to teach a young child. And adults always also say like, oh yeah, I feel like it's so much more difficult for me. Why is that? When I tell them, and I'm very I guess you could say blunt with them, and the reason why they're having a harder time is because adults have expectations and students don't have expectations, right? Young students don't have expectations. So adult might, and ironically with me personally, I get a lot of adult students who are either doctors, lawyers, surgeons, whatever, and I think in a way that's even harder because they come in not only with expectations, but they come in with an expectations of a field that to many is a pretty tough field to get into, especially to do professionally at a high level. So for them, they're like, well, if I can do this and this, I do this as a job, learning how to play a few little children's songs on guitar should be easy. And then they have the hardest time. And then they see like 6 or 7 year olds playing like pieces like way better than they are, all the ways that they're being told, and these kids have no issues. And one is because kids have more time, but two, because the kids are going in there with the expectation of like, I'm a kid, I'm going to learn, I'm not going to be good, I'm going to practice, and I'm going to get better. Adults come in there with the expectation I mentioned earlier, where they want to just kind of do it because they're like, I'm an adult, I can do this, I've always wanted to do this. And I think how this ties back to what you were saying is I think that adult students, or people that, I think that people that get into fingerstyle have that same kind of expectation because they come in there probably already playing guitar a little bit already. They don't come in there as a total beginner. They come in there thinking like, well, I can play X, X, and X on electric guitar, whether it's playing Led Zeppelin, Beatles, playing a few open chords. This should be easy. I can do the hard stuff. I want to just learn some easy finger picking. And as they start to see, easy finger picking isn't so easy. Just as you said in those videos. And I think what happens is, even going into something like Nothing Else Matters, where you're using the thumb, index, middle finger, that is even, I think, in my opinion, too much to start with. It's just like it's kind of like saying, I'm going to learn how to solo, and instead of starting with maybe the solo from Can't Stop, which is just one note on, only a few notes on one string, you try to start with the solo from Sweet Child of Mine, which is all over the neck and much faster. It's like, to some people, people that are playing stuff by like Eric Johnson, like Yngwie Malmsteen, the solo of Sweet Child of Mine isn't a fast solo. It's not difficult. So to them, that's like a quote-unquote easy solo. But you have to break it down even simpler and think, okay, well, I'm going to learn how to finger pick. I'm going to learn how to finger pick maybe with just one finger for a few weeks. And then once I get comfortable with that, then I'm going to add in 2. Then I'll add in the thumb. Then maybe I'll learn 10 songs that use just those skills alone, get those skills really refined. Then I'm going to go on and learn a few more skills that take the same concept, but maybe in a bit more difficult approach. And then you're going to build up from there. But of course, as guitarists, we just want to play our songs that we're learning. And if you play already, it feels kind of almost like a downgrade to like go from playing your favorite rock songs having to just do like just open strings for a few weeks with just 2 fingers. So I think that's why a lot of people have difficulty finger picking, and they get frustrated so easily.
Big time, and especially when you look up on the internet, somebody shares their frustration if it's in a private Facebook group, and next thing you'll get the comment 2 of 79, and it's like, me too, I hate finger picking and I can't do it. And expectations, that is so interesting how you said that. I hadn't thought of that, like that somebody could be a type A adult. Yeah, like I could see they come in, and let's say if they run Ironman or triathlons or marathons, and it's just like, I go out and I drill this. But you said about kids having hours, and that thing I noticed in the past week, 2 or 3 students have come in and they just have this feel to their playing that they hadn't the week before. And I asked them, I was like, surely you must have spent like hours playing just those chords. And they'd look up and they go, yeah, I kind of got lost just in doing it. And that feel is a hard thing for some adults to get to. You know, banging out the 20 minutes a day will get you a lot of things, but the hours do count too.
Definitely, yeah.
But that's great. No, geez, you've great insights. Like, and those books, I'll find them online. I'll link them underneath this lesson, this talk. And what the finger picking techniques? Then you're saying about keeping things on the thumb and the index and the middle after a while. Do you feel that a big thing nowadays is because of the internet, your students are very liable to look up stuff on the net and come back to you the following week and have a small bit of a thing learnt from a YouTube video, and then you're trying to manage that? Or
I got that a lot. One thing that makes it easier with Suzuki is I'm just kind of very clear, like, this is all you need to do. Don't do anything more, don't do anything less. Which is one thing I like about it a lot, because it does avoid those things from happening. Funny enough, occasionally I do get, it's actually not the kids that do it, because they're pretty young, they're not going to go on Google by themselves. But it's actually most of the parents that are like, oh, I was just at home with them one day, I wanted them to learn this, so I Googled it and found a video, is this right? And I'm just like, I always tell them, like, maybe. I'm like, maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but that's not really the point. It's that it's a skill that's not necessarily needed yet, and that skill, because it's not needed yet, it might be overwhelming, it might be confusing, it might not mess up, but it might interfere, you could say, with some of the skills that they're trying to learn now. I mean, and I've parents make the mistake all the time, but I just tell them, like, don't, like, as you saw, like, this is the result of this. I kind of just let them see it, kind of like anything else. And the other thing I tell the students is that I want them to be very transparent with their parents as well as very transparent with me. I tell them, like, look, I might make mistakes, your parents might make a mistake, that's totally fine. But the best thing that we're going to do is we're going to learn from the mistake. So if let's say if it's the kid's dad that comes to the lesson, like, look, if your dad makes a mistake, and I'm going to tell him it's wrong, and you're going to know he did a wrong thing, but that's not a bad thing. Just know that he made a mistake. So I'll tell him, like, oh, look, your dad made a mistake this week by showing something we don't need to do yet, but now we know that we're not going to do this anymore.
Nice. Nice reframing them as lessons, opportunities for growth. Good.
Definitely. But now we know, now we know that we're not going to do this anymore. But then the other big thing then is, so the other thing that comes next, though, then is with the people that maybe look stuff up online. I think what happens is, when we have information online, it's all great information, but the how to that information is never really that clear. So then I come in doing something, I'm like, okay, well, now you did this, and I have to go back and fix how you do that. That's something that you really want to do. I think that's one thing that's great about the Suzuki method, is that not only is the things you need to do so clear, but the approach to how to learn them is so clear. And all the students are learning them in a way that's very effective. And personally, not to kind of like knock any other methods, but I have kids that are 6 and 7 that are doing things that are doing things in a year that a student using a more traditional method might not be able to do in like 2 or 3 years. That's nice. Older than them. And I don't think it has anything to do with the method. I think it just has to do with the approach. If kids are 6 or 7, it's very strict. With Suzuki, it's very strict. Like, do this, don't do this 4 times every day for a week. Oh, could you do that? Now do this 4 times every day for this week. You're in this song, cool, do this thing. And I have kids that are, like, let's say 9 or 10 that have been playing guitar for a year or more, and if I ask them to do the things I'm asking these even younger kids to do, they probably wouldn't be able to do it.
Wow.
So it's really interesting. And again, I don't think it's anything to do with the method. I think it just has to do with the approach to just how they're viewing learning and how they're viewing music. I think the parent involvement helps as well. Because the other thing is, kids that are just playing old methods, they go into the lesson, they learn the lesson, they go home, and for all I know, maybe something wasn't totally clear. For all I know, maybe that something wasn't written down correctly. For all I know, maybe they just forget to practice. With a parent, especially with somebody at such a young age, I tell them you want to start scheduling practice the same way that you schedule doctor's appointments, guitar lessons, play dates, anything else. Because if you schedule things like that, you know that practice is definitely bound to happen.
I like that. That's good.
Kids can't do on their own, obviously. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do that on my own if I was even like 15, 16 years old. But if I'm one of my parents saying, like, hey, your guitar practice is from 5 o'clock to 5:30 every day, I'd be like, oh yeah, I gotta do that first. So, and then you make sure it gets done. And then on top of that, having it being monitored, being like, okay, we're gonna sit down together and do your practice for 15, 20 minutes together. and I'm going to make sure that you do your scale for you do your scale with the best possible tone and a good technique 3 times before we move on to the next thing. Oh, that took 5 minutes. Great. Let's go on and review some of your old songs. Oh, that you had a wrong note. Let's see if we can fix that note. Or, oh, in your lesson you had a hard time with this one. So let's start off by reviewing that one first. Or, oh, here's your new song. Your teacher wants you to get to at least the 10th note, let's say. Let's see if we can get there together. Oh, we only got to the 7th note. That's okay. Tomorrow we'll see if we can get to those other 3. And that way by next lesson we'll have those 10 super solid. So having the structure, I think, for students is super important. And I think asking a kid, when I say kid, I mean even like a 10 to 15-year-old, to develop that structure on their own, I'd want to say is an unfair expectation.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. And is there a thing then with, like, let's say, so these kids are like getting like conditioned with structure and like like compounded daily efforts and great communication and a support team. Has there been any like studies with the Suzuki method into these kids later in life? Like, are they really structured adults, or like, I know you can't really define success, but like, has there ever been a thing where the kids have been later on in life, what am I trying to say, like they're followed up with to see how it affected them?
That I'm not sure, but I think that what you start to see is you see the positive effects of music as a whole, I would say, right? And I'm sure as a teacher you've seen tons of videos where they have like, they're like, oh, we brought like a guitar teacher, not even Suzuki, but to like Juvenile Detention Center, and like the kids there first were all rebellious, and then they got involved because there's what it comes down to is they have something that they're good at. They have something that's theirs. They have something that they're passionate about. They have something that they can connect to. And I think that's the thing that makes it. I think Suzuki is just a great way in that because you get the parents involved so clearly and so well. But what I will say is that any of the students who I've seen do Suzuki, minus the select few, all of them end up being, I want to say, pretty, you could say, academically successful, pretty successful as people. Very few of them actually go into doing music professionally, which is kind of funny because they're going, but if they follow through with Suzuki up until like they're in high school, let's say they start when they're 6 and they keep doing Suzuki guitar lessons until they're 18. Funny thing is, many of them are playing these pieces that are college level pieces better than most undergraduate seniors, like professional like undergrad seniors, obviously with the exception of a few that are like maybe going to some of the top conservatories in the world. But your average like undergrad classical guitar major, these kids in high school are probably playing these college level pieces as good, if not better than them. And none of these kids are going to college music because that wasn't really the end goal. And like I said, some of them definitely do. But the ones that don't, though, a lot of them I see going into college for like medicine or for like to be surgeons, to be doctors of some kind, to be lawyers, to be scientists. Biochem seems to be pretty common amongst them. I don't know why, but it is. And it's really cool though because yes, exactly as you said, I guess you do see kind of a positive result. But there isn't any way to prove that's from the Suzuki. I mean, maybe they just had like a parent that was really involved in life outside of that, and they would have been as successful with that. But it is interesting that you see a bunch of kids all pretty positive, all like pretty happy with where they are, and overall, I guess you could say, just a positive person and having a positive outlook on life because they have something that they can connect to. And I know one thing that many Suzuki parents do once their kids get involved and they ask them what we should do is they always make a deal with their kid like, we have to do this until you're 18 years old, and once we get to there, you can never touch the guitar again if you don't want to, or you can keep playing it for fun. But we want to get to at least this milestone, wherever they get to. I think that's a good way to put it, because there are other things in life as well that we do. I mean, obviously we do it at the school, we do it with other things that was like, hey, look, when you're an adult, you can make your own decisions, but for now, this is something that you're doing, and I want you to have this in your life. And I think that's the whole idea, is helping the kid have a strong connection to music that isn't something that's forced, something they have to do, but something that they want to do because it's just a part of their day-to-day activities.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And I like the 18 thing really can bring in patience into the whole thing. If it's a longer type of a journey, it isn't like they're trying to master it in a year. And with Suzuki then, is there any students who learn, let's say, like GCD strumming out songs alongside it, or is it when you begin Suzuki as a young kid, that's kind of it, you learn the technique and you're in the philosophy and everything, or how does it work?
A lot of people ask about that too, especially parents. And one thing actually to add kind of to a last point with students, kind of on the whole 18 thing actually very quickly, is I know one big thing, it's not part of the Suzuki method, but it's part of definitely what I've seen and teachers talk about a lot, is before Suzuki, they've never had that same kind of longevity in their studio with students. Before, and I'm definitely starting to see that as well. Because I started teaching Suzuki when I was in 2018, and the first like 3 or 4 students I had in 2018, when they were like 5 and 6 years old, I still have now when they're like 9 and 10 years old, which is pretty cool. It's really cool kind of just seeing how they develop as a person. I think one of them, she started when she was in like 5th grade, and now she's in high school. And hearing all the cool high school stuff she's doing. And it's funny because like, I watched videos from like years ago, and I'm like, wow, she was like so much younger then, and back then she knew nothing, and now she's playing like full on pieces by herself and doing like small little recitals. So so it's really cool, and that's definitely something you see with a lot of students and teachers. You see pictures of teachers with students when they're 6 years old, and you see pictures of them at their high school graduation too. So that's actually a pretty common thing with Suzuki. But anyway, back to your other question in terms of learning other styles of music. That's not something that's really enforced in Suzuki, but it is something that's very encouraged.
Yeah.
And what I tell parents is because if they're playing these pieces that are pretty high level things, they definitely have the skills to just finger your basic G, C, D chord. And I actually took a Suzuki course. There's other Suzuki like supplemental courses that you can take. And I took a supplemental course that was specifically for like how to teach like pop and rock and jazz guitar playing to Suzuki students. Oh. And why that's so great is because it works the same exact way. You can, if you're doing that, if the teacher says, hey, if a student's on book 3, they have the skills to learn blank, blank, and blank.
Okay,
if a student's on book 4, they might not know how to do these chords yet, but they've played similar things in their pieces already, so they can learn these chords like that. And I've seen that too, because there's a few pieces where they have the student doing a basic like this kind of shape, and I'm like, hey, just add one more finger, then you've got an A chord. Or, oh, you're doing these 2 fingers down like this, add one more finger, make it a D chord. And what I tell parents and why it's so important is because some parents that don't know about Suzuki, they really want their kid to, they just wonder like, oh, will my kid ever learn how to do, like play basic chords? Will they ever learn how to do like, what maybe they see as like a more like traditional or normal guitar? And I tell them like, this stuff, if they can get through this, that normal guitar stuff is a lot easier. And they're going to be able to do it like that if they want to. And I have a few students who have done that. They've gone through book 1 or book 2. And by the end of those books, they're playing things that sound pretty competent as like solo pieces. And I tell them like, hey, look, if you want to do traditional guitar lessons, that's totally fine. I'm not going to stop you. But I'm going to say if you want to keep taking lessons with me, you have to do the traditional lessons in addition to your Suzuki lessons. And what happens by then is the student either says, cool, I want to still do normal guitar, and they do both, and they're very successful at both. Or they at that point, they're like, well, I really like what I'm doing now, and I think I'm getting good at it, so I don't want to get distracted by something else. And it's funny because usually the kids that do that are the same kids that come into the lessons for the first 3 months being like, I want to get an electric guitar, I want to play AC/DC, I want to play rock music. And then after the successful, and they do 2 recitals of Suzuki or classical guitar, they're like, that stuff's cool, but I'll just listen to it. I want to keep doing this. It's interesting. Usually, it's funny enough. It's the parent that wants them to learn something different. But I tell them like they can, if they want to, they can always do it, and they can learn how to strum chords. They can learn how to solo. Because with Suzuki, the big thing also is they have them learn a bunch of different scales as well. They're playing the scales. They know the G scales like this. I tell them like, oh, all these notes are notes in the G scale, so they can find and rebuild and refinger and play the scale multiple different ways. And if they can do that, learning how to play a simple pentatonic box is going to be like a no-brainer for them.
Yeah.
Because they've been doing stuff like that for so long. So yeah, I do find that we can definitely, it's super easy to transfer a Suzuki student to that. Way easier than it would be to transfer an electric guitarist to someone learning classical. So, very
I can imagine, yeah, like having one type of technique and having the fingers soloing and just having to... No, I have to say, when I did the training course for those 5 days, mentally, the first day I struggled because I had to control my... Like, I'm fairly chill most of the time, but I was there to going, I've booked a week off and I'm playing Twinkle Twinkle, and I'm not even doing it correctly because she kept coming over to me going, no, this way. And I was like, okay. And man, it was after a few hours I kind of chilled out into it, and although I didn't do the next level of it, I did find that the elements of it in teaching young kids, I implemented some of it. Like I remember there was one where you put a beanbag on the student's head so they had better posture. Like that was brilliant, and how just broken down it was, and how involved the parents war. That was an eye opener. It was really good. And
Definitely. Mhm.
and it was interesting. You touched on the thing about the internet. The how, like, the number one thing I see nowadays is if anybody comes in for a lesson and they've already played a bit. Years ago, it'd be that they kind of learned it off a book, but nowadays they could come in with an eighth of a riff, a quarter of this style, a bit of finger picking, a bit of everything going on, and like you're saying, managing expectations can be so tough.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and then having to tell them like, "Hey, cool, you did that, and I have to go back and do it again," is always
Yeah,
so difficult. I have one student like that who is a high schooler, and it's been so difficult to like have him like kind of take some steps back because he just wants to learn everything, which is really cool. I think it's like it's great that he's super passionate about it, and like he'll spend so much of his own time just like going on the internet, learning songs, learning techniques, looking stuff up. Um, and sometimes what happens though is he gets ahead of himself, and then he like learns how to play some John Mayer song, and then he's doing it with a technique that's not gonna make it that efficient. He's like missing one note all the time. And I'm like,
mm.
well, this is why you're missing that one note all the time. Which I think Suzuki definitely helps avoid because it's kind of in its own little space.
Yeah, definitely. Such like baby steps, like baby steps up through a method, and yeah, the technique thing's huge because I think nowadays a lot of players learning online don't see the connection between the value of drilling some practice exercises, even for 10 minutes of their time, and
Yeah.
going back and like the way I do it with students is I kind of book it out the songs. So like a John Mayer solo could be in the listen. This is a 1 year project. We'll work towards
Yeah.
it. Then there's easy like the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Like the Zephyr song is a nice one for starting off on a
Hmm.
string, And with the Suzuki method, then has it been like as we've moved through decades and everything? Has it been majorly updated, or is it like kind of solid fundamentals and like if it ain't broke, don't fix it?
I think in terms of the philosophy behind it, it is kind of like a if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of
Yeah.
approach to it. Only because there's just been so much success throughout it, not only with guitar, but obviously for like violin, for cello, for
Mm.
viola, for piano. There's just been so much success with that philosophy. However, there can be changes in the repertoire, and obviously every teacher is different. Some teachers just find things that work better. Some teachers are taking the pieces in the books and sometimes even rearranging them, saying, "Hey, this piece is in book two, but I think it's actually better suited for book three." And here's a piece that I commonly teach book two students because I think it works as a good supplement to some of the pieces that they're doing in book two. So there's tons of that all over the place. Kind of like I said, everyone's different. So personally, I will teach kids basic chords and have them learn a basic chord progression in G because they've been playing the G scale forever. By the time they're at the end of book one,
Mm.
but some teachers don't do that, right? But I know that by the end of book one, they can play the basic three string G, they can play the open string E minor, they can play a D chord, and they can play the three string C. So if they can do that and they know the G scale really well, I'll teach them that progression in group class, and then I'll have them take turns taking solos because they know the G scale already, the G major scale
Nice.
it is already.
Yeah.
So, but not everyone does that. So for me, someone that comes from originally learning like from a rock and like pop music background, that's something I feel pretty confident doing, and I'm like I can kind of guide them to what's right or what's wrong. But someone who's never done that would probably not do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's one teacher who's really big in the Suzuki field, um, who is yeah. So there's one teacher who's really big in the Suzuki field, and she actually has her undergrad from Berkeley in jazz guitar. So she'll start teaching her book two or three students basics of jazz guitar, which I wouldn't do because I don't know a whole lot about jazz. But someone like her who can really break it down and is a successful jazz teacher as well as one of the bigger names in the Suzuki guitar field is of course she's going to incorporate jazz. She's going to give them maybe make jazz versions of their songs once they've mastered it and reharmonize them to having more drop two kind of voicings or drop three voicings. Definitely, I mean it's kind of just go for your own approach and incorporate who you are as a teacher. It's not necessarily doing the same thing, but it's coming from the same approach and then starting with the same thing, but then incorporating your own style to it. Like you mentioned with the beanbag thing, that's a pretty common one.
Yeah.
But the other cool thing with teachers is that every teacher has their own approach, their own techniques, and their own games. That's kind of the whole idea of Suzuki festivals um, or Suzuki communities or Suzuki studios is that you teachers can just meet and be like, oh, I do this game. Like, oh, that's a really fun game. There's tons of times I've gone to a Suzuki convention. That's
Yeah.
the word I was looking for before. But there's tons of times I've gone to a Suzuki convention and there might be a lecture just on different games that you can do. And the person that's presenting might have like a list of games that they've gotten from other teachers or that they've done themselves. But sometimes people will be like, "Oh, that reminds me of a game I do," and the person's like, "Wow, that's a really good idea. I'm going to add that to my list." So, and that's the whole idea of like connecting with other teachers, kind of seeing like, "Hey, what games do you do?" Like I said, the beanbag one is pretty common. Playing Hangman is also a pretty common game in lessons I like
Okay.
to do because kids like Hangman. Or a game that I've learned about from another teacher maybe in the last few years that I always think would be pretty boring, but kids seem to love it, is kind of the line, what we call like the line drawing game. And how that works is once the student does something successfully, you add another line, and the whole idea is you have to keep adding lines until they guess the picture that you're drawing.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
for them, they just want to guess the picture. And that was a great over Zoom because I could just have my tablet open and I could start me drawing stuff while I was doing it. And they'd be like, "Oh, dude, if you get it again, like that was really good. Let's add another line." Or, "Oh, that's not. I don't think you did it as well as last time, so I can't draw a line. You have to wait." And then they want to get the picture, so they're really focused on doing it right over and over and over. And then they're like, "Oh, it's a picture of like a house." Another thing they do is for me personally, is I'm really bad at drawing on paper or on computer. So for them, it's also just a joke of how bad my pictures are. And I have to send so it kind of just becomes this whole. And I obviously preface that with them with that as well, just saying like, "Hey, this is something I don't do well." So it'll be fun to see how bad it is. I'm sure you can draw way better than I can. Well, and I'll let them pick the colors. Every now and then I'll add the own colors in myself. I'll be like, "Oh yeah, it's just fun." While I'm talking, I'll be filling stuff in and be like, "Yeah, so you gotta work on that technique, but it's really good." And then I'll be like adding like a blue sky or something fun. Um, and I think that's the important thing too. I think the kids definitely need that personal connection as well. They need to definitely know and appreciate you as a person. Because even though yeah, the method is very strict, but the kid needs that connection to the teacher as the person as well. I mean, um,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's one thing as the years have gone on here. Like in the beginning, like when I started out teaching, I like my own teacher. My lessons were meant to be 30 minutes, and usually it would go a
yeah,
few minutes over, and those few minutes over add up over a couple of years. And I began to do the same when I started teaching because I had the time to do it, and
Mhm.
the connections with students. There's students I can meet now, and they're in their late 20s, and I feel like I know them and they're friends, and like, but students now I do teach 20 minutes nowadays, but which it's much harder to make that connection. Just with
Yeah,
COVID, my lessons were in groups of two and three, and I was like, this isn't going to work. So I went online and it was all one to one. So I narrowed down the time.
yeah,
And with Suzuki, I'll just ask one final question. With
yeah.
Suzuki and like COVID, like how was it teaching the Suzuki method over Zoom?
You know what I tell everyone, and I mean, I was also very lucky, but it seemed that a lot of Suzuki teachers were in the same boat. Is I don't think I lost any students besides, I don't think I lost, yeah, I don't think I lost any students besides maybe like one or two. And that wasn't because of their own interest. That was just because of COVID, they were in a situation where their families just couldn't.
Mm.
Um, but it was definitely harder, but it kind of created some of its own benefits. One of the big benefits is that because the group classes went virtual, I could actually include students from other places that normally couldn't do groups
Yeah.
there into it. So it was really cool. And like so I'm like, hey, this is a student I have somewhere else. You guys don't know them, but here it is. And I was able to kind of find other ways to incorporate it. Um, I obviously like many teachers. I'm sure I've come to a conclusion that that lessons overall are just better in person. So I mean, like we're very happy that we're getting back to doing stuff in person now. But it wasn't that bad. I think a lot of parents at first were hesitant at first, like, oh, how's this going to work? And I think that's where my saying the more complex the situation, the more creative the solution needs to be was so applicable because once we got into the COVID things where everything was online, I told them like, look, you still got to do the same things, but you might have to be extra careful. Like and on my end too, it was a bit more work. I would send them videos of certain techniques that maybe I couldn't just get the best camera angle,
Yeah.
or maybe they just couldn't see. I'd be like, hey, this is just another shot. I'd have my phone next to me. I'd be like, hey, I'm gonna email you a video, watch it quickly. Um, since I couldn't play along with the students, as you probably know from trying to play
Yeah.
along with students,
That was the big one.
there's always the lag and stuff, and there's always delay in the audio. So what I would do is I would record all the teachers' parts for all the songs, just send them to everyone once like the few weeks of COVID. I'm like, hey, here's me playing them in lessons. Play along with that, and so I can hear you in real time playing along with something, and all of that stuff. And that was the big thing that really kind of happened for me. What I will say is, since COVID, I've had 5 students do recitals via Zoom, and
Oh,
And it was honestly just as good as it was in person. They played along with the teacher backing track or a teacher recording.
Yeah.
We invited all their friends and family to hop in over Zoom. It was just a big Zoom call, and they just played for us. And then, and I have all the recitals saved as videos that I just edited out for myself and added maybe a better recording on the teacher's part, maybe isolate their part a little bit more, and maybe just added some basic like video filters just to make it pop a bit more. And it ended up being really nice. So, so yes, it wasn't the ideal situation, but I think.
You got
we
creative.
definitely made it work. We got very creative, and I will say the big thing about Suzuki, the community, was as soon as COVID happened, there was tons of emails to us being like, "Hey guys, what are some of your tips that you're doing with Zoom lessons? Oh, what are some fun games that you guys do over Zoom? Or like, what are some fun group activities that you guys can do over Zoom?" And sometimes in like some Suzuki training courses, there would just be like a portion, like a good like 2 or 3 hours of the course dedicated just to like, "Hey, here's some fun book 2 group ideas that you can do over Zoom." So. So it definitely became a big thing, but the community was super helpful with that. Everyone was asking each other questions in terms of microphones, in terms of equipment, in terms of best programs to use, in terms of different recording stuff to do. If anybody had extra recordings of them playing it, if they didn't have time to record it themselves. That's where the Suzuki community, as teachers, really was super helpful for each other.
Man, that is fascinating. Geez, I could listen to you talk about Suzuki for hours. But listen, thanks so much for joining me today. We'll stop it here for now, and I want to say thanks a million again, and no doubt it will give people a great insight. Like, it blew my mind the time I did the training course. I was like, I'd heard of the Suzuki Method for violins, and I heard about guitar, but the videos of these young kids playing these pieces and the philosophy and this massive network, it blew my mind. But for somebody now to hear about it even on the net, that's brilliant. So thanks so much for taking the time.
Of course, definitely. No, thank you for having me.
Not a bother. And where can people find out more about you?
Sure. So, so as mentioned, my name is John Cesar. You can find me over on YouTube. So one thing I do currently is I actually have my own YouTube channel. Where on there I make videos about classical guitar mostly, and just kind of classical guitar humor. You can find me just by YouTubing my name, but you can also find me by looking up on YouTube for the classical guitarist, which is kind of the back behind the scenes name for my channel, as well as other social media platforms such as Instagram or Facebook. And yeah, that's probably the best place to find me. I make, like I said, I make videos about videos and photos and things that just kind of about the overall humor and culture behind classical guitar. We're trying to do some new things, such as doing like virtual classical guitar open mics where everyone can kind of sign up and play for each other, and a bunch of cool other things as well. So that's where you can find me if you guys are interested.
Man, totally. I'll link your channel underneath this, and geez, I'm gonna have to get my can I get a rush on get this nylon string guitar, classical guitar.
Definitely.
you're intriguing my interest here. So John, thanks so much. I'll stop recording here and we'll just hang on for a sec. So thanks again.
Cool. Sounds great.